prize money, racecourse attendance, conduct on racecourses, fixtures and funding, the structure of British racing. Each and every day this is in the in tray of RCA Chief Executive, Racecourse Association Chief Executive David Armstrong, who's with me now. And it's not getting any quieter for you, is it?
No, I think the agenda just changes. We obviously had a period of time when everything COVID-related and the return of spectators was the priority. Now we're back in pretty much business as usual and we're getting on with the day job, but it certainly doesn't get any quieter.
Are spectators coming back in the numbers you'd hoped?
At the moment, yes, they are. We've actually seen some very encouraging signs around particularly major events. Great crowds at Cheltenham, Aintree, a good day yesterday at Newmarket, for example. A little less consistent around other days. So some courses are doing well, others not quite so well, and we're trying to understand why some of those people aren't coming back yet.
What's your hunch? What do you think?
I think it's probably a couple of things. I mean, there's definitely an element of it is financial. You know, with the increasing cost of living for everyone, disposable income, it's just that little bit tougher and people are tightening their belts. I think there's a little bit of that. I think there's some people still a little nervous about coming back to major events after COVID, and whether that'll be a permanent thing or a temporary thing we're trying to understand now. So I think there's a few factors in there. But other sports are the same. Other sports are facing the same challenges about spectator levels. Probably best describe them as inconsistent as well.
Are we moving, and we've talked about this a little bit before, are we moving to a situation now where if you've got a Cheltenham or an Aintree, you're going to do great? But the sort of mezzanine level fixtures are going to have fight like hell for every person who walks through that gate.
Yes, no, they are, and of course their competitors are not particularly, necessarily racing or even other sports. It can be Netflix. The sofa is often our biggest competitor, and we need to encourage people to come back to racing if they've been before, and people who are new to come to racing should find the next 6 months very exciting across our racing programme.
So when you hear, for example, people not being let into enclosures because they're wearing the wrong clothes, and I don't want to simply pick on the Sandown example last week because this has happened across all sorts of racecourses. When you hear of extortionate admission prices for a quiet, low-key day on a Monday, you must be thinking to yourself, we're not doing enough here, are we, to make this sport accessible?
Well, we shouldn't make it hard for people. That's the first thing, Nick. If it's about dress codes or pricing, individual racecourses need to make those decisions for themselves. But they all want to make sure that their spectator numbers are healthy. So they've got to make the right decisions. And, from time to time, if we need to change a dress code or change a pricing strategy, then we should.
Yeah, and can you intervene in that sense or not?
No, I mean...
Can you guide? Can you guide? Can you say, look, as chief exec of your body, I feel that we need some kind of overarching racing strategy here to make sure that this is as appealing as possible?
Not so much in that there are things going on in terms of bringing people to the racecourse, we'll come to in a minute. But in terms of things like pricing strategy, each racecourse will make its own decisions on that based on its knowledge of its local market. And they'll have more knowledge of that local market than I ever could. So they're best placed to make that decision. But something that we are doing that's very interesting in the coming months is through Great British Racing, GBR, we're launching what's going to be a consideration campaign. And by that I mean trying to encourage people to come racing who have considered coming racing before but aren't really yet racegoers or not regular racegoers. And we're going to be targeting that on Q3 of this year, so July through September. And that's intended to reach new audiences and bring new people to the racecourse. And that's going to be supported by Great British Racing, as I say, and part funded by the Levy Board.
How do you find them? How do you find the people who've considered going racing but haven't gone racing yet?
Well, you typically find them through online channels, through social media, through careful research that we do from GBR do all year round to understand people that may or may not be interested in attending all sports events.
Is this algorithmic targeting?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if I'm sitting here with my phone here, if I started talking about basketball, but I've never been to a professional basketball game, suddenly the basketball society would be, or whatever it is, would be bombarding me on Facebook with messages for come to this fixture.
Sort of, yes, although not bombarding.
We'll try it at the end to see if it's worked.
See if you come to a basketball game. I think bombarding sort of implies that you're going to be getting all this unwanted messaging, and that's not what it's about. It's about giving people the opportunity to come racing who have an interest in sport, probably an interest in horses, probably an interest in racing, and just presenting them with that opportunity and communicating with them to encourage them to try a day at the races.
Okay. Is this something that you have tried before in any shape or form? Is this an extension of initiative that has already taken place, or is this entirely
it's a sort of
fresh?
follow-up. What we were doing, we were planning to launch this actually in the summer of 2020, and of course COVID got in the way, so it never happened. And we're recycling the idea 2 years later. And what it was intended to be was an extension of what was then the Under 18s Go Free campaign. So what you were trying to do is to get families, kids under 18, to be interested in racing and to come that way. This time we're expanding it, so there will still be a message aimed at the under 18-year-old, but now it's at a wider range of people saying, come racing, give it a try.
Oh, do you think there should ever be a dress code at a racecourse, apart from, say, Royal Ascot and the Derby?
That's a good question. I don't think there should be a dress code as such that you end up having something you enforce so strictly. I think you'll see it every time you go racing. People love dressing up when they come racing. It's one of those. It's a real tradition of racing that we should be very proud of. At many fixtures, people will dress in a way that they might not normally dress anyway. To come racing, it's a thing. It's a real valuable asset in our sport, is the fact that people dress up, and we don't want to discourage that either. Because so many people, when they come to the races, they come relatively infrequently. They dress up, they get a hat, they do whatever they're going to do, and it's a big day out.
Yeah, but you think we shouldn't have dress codes?
Well, I wouldn't go as far. I mean, you mentioned things like Royal Ascot.
Yeah, that's why I said accepted them, because we know that's
I think you need
a bit special. But
I would. The phrase dress code implies that you're almost going to be barred or sanctioned or something if you don't follow the dress code. So I might find a different way to express it.
Would you prefer a guide?
Yes.
But not one that has to be adhered to. You wouldn't be throwing people out on the basis of what they're wearing.
Well, I think we've got to work hard to get people to come racing. So we shouldn't make it hard for them by not letting them in when they do come. So I'd be very careful about doing that. So
would you, going back to my original point, would you find it quite embarrassing when you read a story about racecourses not turning people away?
Well, I think the incident at Sandown is worth, I haven't gone through all the detail of that with Jockey Club to understand exactly what happened. It creates the wrong headline. Of course it does. It makes it sound as though racing is putting up barriers to people coming, and actually we're not.
What can you do about the continued bad behaviour on racecourses and the fighting, which has become a real issue and a real problem?
It has, but it is still, an isolated exception when it does occur.
But quite a lot of isolated exceptions.
Well, there are incidents that that have happened, and actually a slight increase.
I'll put it to you like this, David. Yesterday, we were all saying how fantastic the racing was at Newmarket and what a lovely atmosphere it was, and it was quite a high octane, quite party atmosphere towards the end. But we were all saying how lovely it was, and we also said to each other in some surprise, "Oh, and there was no obvious fighting either," as though that was great. There was no fighting yesterday. That's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and it is about isolated incidents. And since the end of lockdown, there probably have been more isolated incidents than perhaps there were before. And I think other parts of society have seen the same thing. There was a report this week published, I saw in one newspaper, talking about increased violence outside pubs and nightclubs since the end of lockdown. Not a huge increase, but an increase nevertheless. And it's something we have to be wary of. And that we adopt a very strict policy regarding any incidents on the racecourse. We work hard to reduce the incidence of people drinking too much and those sorts of things. And we continue to strive to do that. Can you ever eliminate the risk of isolated incidents? No, you can't.
But you can work pretty hard to reduce the incidence of fighting on racecourses and at any sporting venue, can't you? Don't you need a greater police presence and police who are actually prepared to do something about it?
Well, I think each sporting event, each race day, the racecourse itself will make a decision about what level of policing support it wants. And that'll be in conversation with its local police authority, others like the safety advisory group at the racecourse. And they'll make a decision about the level of police presence they want on the racecourse to act as a deterrent quite often. And that doesn't always mean that you'll choose to bring police onto the racecourse. The racecourse environment is typically very convivial, very friendly. It's a very low-risk environment from a police point of view. So we have to be careful not to over-police and put people off for that reason. So a racecourse will look at what's the risk of a particular day and then make a decision about what level of policing it wants, request that from the local police authority and put it in place.
Tell me, what are, say, private security allowed to do when a fight breaks out? Because a lot of people will say, right, well, there's a fight, the security won't really do an awful lot. What are they allowed to do? Their powers presumably don't extend as far as police officers does.
No, they don't, and they're very wary of that in terms of what their powers are. And there's a categorization of powers between the certain people will have and others won't. By and large, most people that are on a racecourse as a private security firm can't actually physically intervene in an incident if it happens. So
they're a little bit pointless.
Well, it depends on how you want to manage your race day. If you want to...
They're more like marshals than security guards, aren't they?
Possibly, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you do need some backup policing.
Well, it depends on the race day. I mean, you mentioned, a highly charged day at Newmarket might be a day where you might choose to have, you look at the police presence and you might increase it. Other race days where incidents break out, you'd probably look at that and think that's always going to be a low-risk day. We probably wouldn't police that one. In a higher sense. So it's individual decisions.
Let's talk about prize money. It was announced this week there would be record prize money for 2022. The prize money in 2023 is going to go down, isn't it, after that?
Well, not necessarily, but there's a lot of pressure on 2023. In 2022, we've got the benefit of additional levy board funding. We've got the benefit of the winter support package that we got from DCMS during COVID. And that's flowing through into...
And that was 40 mil, was it, the support package?
It was actually 21 million.
21 million.
21.5 million, of which about 7.5 has gone directly into prize money. So that has an impact because that stops.
And where's the rest gone?
Part of it's gone into integrity costs. Part of it's gone into further CapEx funding from the levy board. So it's gone into different things.
So capital expenditure on sort of maintaining racecourses,
yeah,
basically.
And various projects that the levy board's involved with. It's just levy board general spending.
Okay.
So that means that you've got risks into the 2023 prize money number. The other thing we have to be wary of is, of course, that the levy board is continuing to use its reserves to fund prize money this year. It'll probably not be able to do that forever, and so therefore the levy board funding into prize money could also go down in 2023.
So 2023, it is looking very likely, unless racing pulls its finger out in an extraordinary fashion, prize money in 2023 will be lower than prize money in 2022. Would you say that's a strong likelihood?
I wouldn't say a strong likelihood, but it's definitely possible. And the reason why it might not be, of course, is that racecourses can choose to fill those gaps if they can with executive contribution, and many will, I think, will do so. So therefore, it's not an absolute certainty that prize money will go down, but there'll be a lot of pressure on prize money.
Yeah, I mean, perception-wise, how important do you think it is for racecourses to get out there and say, we will ensure that our executive contribution will mean that prize money does not go down between 2022 and 2023? Otherwise, your membership are going to feel the full force at a particularly febrile time for the balance of racing's power.
Well, I think it's very important to look at in the round as to the full financial pressure that racecourses face. They're still recovering from COVID. COVID cost us over £325 million as racecourses collectively during that period. Now, COVID's largely finished, and we are seeing crowds back, and that's very healthy. But it takes a long time to recover from that, and people, do need to understand that. It's only when we really get to the point where we've set out what we think the 2023 fixture list will look like, that racecourses can then say what their prize money is going to be. At the moment, that's still up in the air.
Well, there is one way, of course, of ensuring that prize money per fixture is greater in 2023 than it was in 2022, and that is by reducing fixtures. Is there any possibility of a reduction in fixtures?
I think we're in the middle of the fixture and funding cycle. We go through the cycle that runs through to about end of July time, when we're looking at fixture list, funding options, and all the different permutations that might be suitable for 2023. And we're sort of bang in the middle of that at the moment. So it's too early to say what the likely outcome is going to be. I think the reducing fixtures is one way of doing things, but there are other areas to look at as well, because what we're really trying to encourage is to increase competitiveness in British racing. And one of the things that helps to increase competitiveness is prize money. But there are other things that can help you improve competitiveness as well. And one measure of competitiveness is, for example, average field size, which we've seen under pressure in recent times.
So what's going to drive up the competitiveness and average field size if it's not prize money? What are these other things?
Well, prize money is part of it, so I wouldn't exclude that. But
I'm interested in the other things that you mentioned that might increase competitiveness.
Well, I think what we've got to look at is the drivers of why field sizes have been under pressure. and to look to address those. Is it the race program? Are we matching the race programs with the horse population well enough? Have we got enough of a narrative about the race program to encourage increased runners? An interesting stat for you, Nick. One of the measures or key KPIs that makes the biggest difference in racing is the number of times a horse runs per year. Mm-hmm. And our runs per horse are actually quite low compared to other countries. If we were able to increase our runs per horse by 0.5...
We're just talking about on the flat here,
No, both flat and jumps.
But are you amalgamating flat and jumps? Because that would give you a bit of a skewed statistic if you were making that as a comparison with France.
No, the comparison is done by the two codes separately.
Yeah, okay.
But we're sort of behind on both. Mm-hmm. So if you were to increase the average runs per horse by 0.5, so you have two horses and one of them runs once more in the year, doesn't seem so difficult, you transform the economics of British racing. So if we can look at what are the drivers of why can't we do that? Why is that difficult? Because the average runs per horse has actually stuck at around about the same number for a very long time. And it doesn't really move. How do we move it?
Do you think that we as an industry have underestimated the impact of the pandemic on the horse population? We keep being blithely told that there are the same amount of horses in training and that the foal population is this, that and the other. Are we actually really seeing the effect yet? Is it not the case that the horse population is about to go into decline?
It might not necessarily go into decline. The key thing you have to do is to look at have we got the right level of horses in the right places, so that we've got strong horse numbers, in the middle to lower end of the program. Have we got strong enough horse numbers at the top end of the program? Not necessarily. And you'll have seen stories recently about the number of horses from sales that are going to overseas jurisdictions. So the greater risk is that middle to top end. Have we got the right horses in that group to be able to deliver through the programme?
Who's running the show now? Who's running the sport?
Well, I don't think anybody could have answered that question before now, so I don't know. No, I think the tripartite structure that we've been working under for since 2015 is still in place. We're looking at how we might make amendments to that and changes to that, and there's a strong working group spending time on that right now. So that's looking at options on structure of the BHA and governance models and that sort of thing, and reviewing how that tripartite structure could work more effectively.
Anna-Marie Phelps has stood down as chair of the BHA to be replaced by Joe Somers-Smith. Is that a transition that you were calling for?
Not especially. I'm not involved in the nominations committee at the BHA.
No, but you have a great deal of influence as the chief executive of the key stakeholder.
I think what Anna-Marie made her choice not to carry on, and she's done a fantastic job for us as chairman. So that's the first thing I would say. Joe comes with an absolute army of knowledge. He's incredibly knowledgeable racing person. His understanding of bookmaking and everything else is going to be very, very valuable for us. So they're different, and they bring different strengths into the role. I think as we go through looking at how to strengthen the BHA, how to get the BHA more directly involved in some aspects of driving the strategy in the sport.
So is the BHA now going to be a commercial beast again under Somers-Smith?
No, its remit will be very similar, but what we'll see is probably a greater role for the BHA in driving industry strategy. And giving Julie Harrington the freedom to do that more. That's not necessarily to say commercially. It's looking at the whole picture of what the industry strategy should look like. And the BHA will be able to do that, I think, in a more positive way than previously.
All right, for the moment, David Armstrong, thank you very much. We'll take a short break.